the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region and recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs remain significant to the living Kaurna people today. I'll now hand this session over to Sharon Perkins. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. We do have a couple of apologies tonight. Councillor Solomon and Councillor Lorna have sent their apologies, and Jim's not here at this point in time. So thanks for coming along. So this is our second budget session. So the primary focus of this session will actually be providing an overview of the new initiatives and the capital projects. But before we get into that, I just thought I'd just give a bit of a recap of where we're at with respect to the recurrent budget. So, and just in relation to the financial strategy, so which is basically underlying the long-term financial plan and the basis of the budget. So the two strategies that we probably need to take into account is obviously still, because we're talking about the new initiatives and they're part of our operating budget, so they contribute to our operating surplus, we still have to make sure that we're maintaining that control of expenditure. So we can't just sit there and say, okay, well, we're still going to do everything that we want to do or need to do or have asked to do. So we still need to have some of that control. And the other one is in relation to narrowing the infrastructure renewal gap. So that's where we actually come in and talk about the capital project. So there's two elements of the capital program. So it's our renewal. So that's just basically renewing existing infrastructure. And then there's the new, which is actually building the new infrastructure as well. So they're the two elements that we need to be cognisant of as we go through.
Here's my opening gambit. I just want to clarify, because I did read your email from SCOSO. Now, what we're trying to do is to reduce the maintenance on our infrastructure. So the way it was sold to me was that our staff are going around putting band-aids on things, and we need to get over that, renew it, so we reduce the ongoing costs. Is that what it is? Is that in a nutshell?
So with respect to the renewal gap, so obviously we haven't been investing in renewing our assets, our existing infrastructure. So to continue, and so then they are being subject to more maintenance. So repairs of potholes, concrete grinding and all that sort of stuff to make them safe. So, and that's where that renewal gap is. So if we're actually renewing and intervening in our infrastructure assets at particular points and that right point from an engineering perspective, we will avoid that maintenance expenditure that we actually need to do, which actually hits the bottom line.
Okay, just to clarify again, I just want to make sure that we're all clear on this. When we agreed to it, there was a comment around the table that every renewal or capital item will be discussed here, and we'll make a decision. So, do we then say every time we want to renew an asset, we actually look at the ongoing cost and the savings of that we will achieve by renewing that asset? Is that what we actually have? Is that the test we have to give?
No. The test is to sit there and say, from an asset renewal perspective, there's and Ashley's probably, I'm not an engineer, but my understanding is to sit there and say, for every asset, there's an intervention point that basically you should actually be renewing that asset to actually make sure that you're maintaining the condition and the serviceability and reducing your maintenance costs. That is what we actually need to do with renewal. So at the moment, I would sit there and say, because we have been investing in our asset renewal, what's actually been happening is that we haven't been doing those interventions when we're actually required to, based on a condition, a condition that has been, which is an acceptable standard. and what's actually, our assets have deteriorated. So what we've actually been doing is patching, and that patching and filling the potholes and doing all that sort of stuff is actually straight maintenance, and it's not renewal. So that is the objective, is to renew, so we don't have to do the maintenance, and then when we get to a point where we decide that we actually want to spend some money on the asset, we're actually reconstructing. So we're actually spending more money further down the track.
Just last one, there's a term that gets bandied around which says sweating the asset. So that means, from my understanding, is you take the asset out as far as you can before you have to renew it. That's fine. I'm from all that I've listened to around here and all the presentations, the take-home message that I received was that we need to renew assets because our operational budget is going up, and it's a real cost now. So we've gone past where we can sweat the asset, and we're now, all these assets that we haven't done anything with is costing us more. And an example I would have is the pool. We haven't put any money in the pool, and each year for the last 14 years, I've seen huge amounts of money going into the budget to basically put a band-aid on the pool, where we could have actually just said, let's renew it. And I understand that, I mean, that to me is a perfect example of where we've sweated the assets so far and we're just spending money without, on something we shouldn't be, and we should have renewed it 15 years ago. But when I look through here, I see examples where we're not actually sweating that asset, and it just seems like something we want to do because it's a nice thing to do. But as we go through here, I'll bring them up.
I'll just make a comment. I don't think that in my time we've talked about sweating assets, and fundamentally, as to sit there and say, yes, the pool may be one example, but I can rest assure you that there's a lot of roads throughout the network. We have a $500 billion asset base, which is predominantly transport assets, and that is where we're actually talking about the fact that we have been underinvesting in those renewals, that the renewal of the road reseal, the footpaths and the curbs, which is where we actually need to address. And that is where that's actually costing the maintenance cost. And the comments about the maintenance is, if we do not renew our assets, there's no way we can actually bring down our operating costs, because we are continually putting potholes and patches on essential infrastructure that the community expects to be at a much higher standard than what it actually is at now. Chris, did you want to? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add the comment that you're asking a question about how do you assess renewal. The council's done the heavy lifting with your asset management plans, where the staff has said, look, here's our asset management plans and they'll guide us. In essence, all the renewals you'll see here have been driven out of those asset management plans. And the question you should be asking is, if we don't spend this renewal money now, what's the consequence? And the consequence is your assets don't last the lives that they were originally built to last. And then you're passing that cost on to future councils and generations if you don't invest the small amounts now. That's the way I think it should be approached.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you rightfully bring up the SCOSA report. I guess the piece to take comfort in is the SCOSA report actually turned around and said, the way you currently sit right now, you're not a sustainable council, which is what we've been warned about under this modern day management routine that we're starting to see, in my opinion, pay dividends in what we're actually looking at in the company. But what SCOSA also acknowledged, if you look through the report, it actually turns around and it says, look, you're unsustainable, but your future sustainability actually starts getting back from the red into the orange. However, you do need to kick those goals. We're not willing to give you the green because you haven't kicked your ambitious goals yet. However, you do have the strategies in place that tell us, give us a comfort to allow you to come from this council into the middle stream. You start kicking those goals. We're willing to give you the badge that you passed. Now, when you look at the comparison between Alexandrina Council, but that council stayed unsustainable and still unsustainable moving into the future because they haven't forecast, they haven't planned, or I'm just reading between the lines, I haven't read their books. But our long-term financial plan gave SCOSA the comfort to say, you're sitting here, but we really like the fact that you've acknowledged it and you've got some solutions to those problems.
Look, the only problem I've got really is that in 5 years' time, we start paying back $30 million. I can't see that as in reality. And that's the problem. I'd like to see, when we make a decision, we actually look at the operational savings we'd have from that decision, which I think is what we agreed to when we're in this table. I remember people saying that. But I can't see in 5 years' time that we're going to start paying back $30 million over 5 years. I think that's unrealistic. And looking at some of these budget bids, I'm aghast, you know, really aghast at what's been in here. But anyway, we'll work through it.
Yep. Just want to reinforce again the LGFA conditions, that in the sense that what we actually need to do is actually stick to the plan, and if there's any variations outside the plan, that's when we actually need to actually go back to them and seek their input as to whether they're actually comfortable with doing that. So again, that's the premise that we've actually, as staff and an executive, looked and developed this budget in the context of those two elements of the overall strategy, and that those conditions that we've put on, that's been put on to us from LGFA. So just in relation to the draft budget as it stands now, so obviously a couple of weeks ago we were presented the draft recurrent budget, and the goal was to try and get a operating surplus of around about $120,000 from our recurrent budget. What we've actually done at this point in time is that it's sitting at an operating surplus of $277,000. So that's slightly higher than what was actually presented the other night. And again, I'll reiterate that we are continually looking at that operating budget as well. And obviously there are some things in relation to, like the finance costs. Once we actually have that capital works program and the final budget determined, that will actually link back to what our actual I suppose what we need to borrow and what our funding requirements are. And obviously there has been a reduction in the interest rate. So there's been the 25 basis points. There is some talk about that there may be another reduction between now and the end of the financial year. Who knows whether that will actually eventuate. But so there may be some more savings there. The new initiatives that we actually present tonight is around about $817,000. That's in line pretty much with what we actually had in the long-term financial plan. So we had in the long-term financial plan around about $800,000 of expenditure. And then the income from the new initiatives is Roads to Recovery funding, which we use to fund a capital works program, so that we use that money to offset what we actually need from a borrowings perspective. And then there's also a grant fund, which is a continuation of a grant that we actually received last year, which was the Community Development Program. So that's actually second year of that as well. So together, all things being equal, we're sort of looking at that, we're predicting or proposing an operating surplus of $79,000. That's against the long-term financial plan that was forecasting a operating deficit of $183. Obviously, that all depends on any decisions that are made once the budget actually comes back to council. So we do have a special council meeting on the 18th of March, which is the purpose of that is to endorse the draft budget and then it will actually be forwarded through to the Risk and Audit Committee for their comments and feedback. And then we'll go out for public consultation during May. So again, this is the starting point. So this is, I suppose, the administration's initial submission to you guys, and then it's up to the decisions that are made thereafter. So just in relation to so this is just a bit more summary of the initiatives budget. So there are two elements. So there are employee expenses. So the draft initiatives budget allows for 3 new FTE positions, and we can go through them later once we've finished here. And that assumes that they will actually commence from October, because obviously the budget won't get adopted until the end of June. We won't be in a position to actually go out and recruit. Essentially, we'll be recruiting from pretty much 1st of July. So from that perspective, Brian, you look like you want to answer a question.
Thanks, Sharon. I think one part that it's been raised so many times in the last 4 or 5 years and so forth is the staff wages. Now, we've just employed another 3 people, and we don't know as elected members, but we obviously are accepting the fact that they are necessary. But 16 million, as it's been listed in the previous one there, is far too much, as been stated for many, many times, for wages for the size of this council. So when is there going to be a discussion on the fact of who is doing what and when, or is that only in the senior management and the CEO's class?
I might grab that, Sharon. Where are you basing those numbers from, Brian? Where are you basing those numbers from? No. In terms of your comment about the wages are too high for an organisation of this size, have you got something you're comparing that to?
For the size of our council. It's been stated before, different people have talked about it.
Yeah, but was it stated by people that know the facts? And just coming in on face value, my estimation is that I think for an organisation this size, we actually do very well with the staff numbers we have. I don't disagree, it looks like a big number, and we're happy to do some benchmarking for you to give you a level of comfort, and maybe that's what we need to do, give you a little bit of benchmarking, just so it puts it in context, just so we can show that it's not out of proportion. And you're correct, we certainly wouldn't have asked for staff if we didn't think they were needed. The challenge we've got now as an organisation, if council takes a view that the wages are too high, we've got to make some hard decisions about which services we don't provide and which staff we remove from the organisation. But I'm pretty confident I can do some benchmarking, or the team can do some benchmarking to give you a level of comfort that our staffing and wages are actually, I think they're on the lower side of average, but happy to look at that for you to give you a level of comfort.
Just to, I guess, add to that conversation, the SCOSA report did sort of point out our growth in staffing levels as well. So we have been, I guess, scrutinised in that space. Now, whether or not our expenditure on staffing costs is actually in line with the services we need to deliver, and your staffing mix is not necessarily what you're paying, but have we got the right staff in the right arms of the business, I think is the conversation that we're seeing flow out. And that is around, which I think Chris has also pointed out quite recently, that it isn't just replacing positions for the sake of replacing positions. Every position that is up for replacement is up for review. And that is also about finding our vision pieces on which direction we want to send the company. And there is some questions that I have coming forward in relation to staffing, so I'll leave that later on. But the fact that, I guess, even an external auditor, being SCOSA, has come in and notified us on the staffing mix. Not necessarily saying we have too much staff, but whether or not we're pointing them in the right direction, I guess, is the question. And unfortunately, that solution doesn't actually happen within one budget cycle. You know, that is a strategy that you turn around and you go, okay, that has performance management milestones tick to it, that has strategic plans that need to be ratified tick to it. Like, there's a bit in that going on. However, I've had the same conversations, Brian, in the private sector, because there is a lot of things that we do in the arms of the private sector that we can relate to. You know, we talk about capital works, we talk about construction and whatever else. You sit there and you go, well, how much staff are we allocating to this, and then what do we do for the same sort of money, is where we need to be clear on the communication piece in relation to our staffing mix, because I like to think that our staff aren't like for like in the private sector. Me as a project manager and what I manage isn't an equivalent in local government, because we expect different things in the business as well. And I think that's where our communication pieces need to be bang on, which again, going back to the SCOSA report, is one of their strongest recommendations in our communication in making sure our community understands where the money goes.
And then, in addition to the staff, the additional staff positions that are recommended, they haven't been employed yet, Brian. So they're just presented as an option to address some of the concerns that have been coming out of the chamber as well. And then there's around about $450,000 worth of materials or third-party expenditure as well.
I think where I'm coming from is that we have some fantastic staff, there's no doubt about that, but we seem to be overloaded in many ways. I'll just point out a couple of ways. Because I'm an old fart, I'm on the Elderly Citizen Committee, and at those meetings there's 3 paid staff, and I sort of think, why is there 3 paid staff at this meeting when basically one person could handle it? And then when we get the minutes, they're given to us from another paid staff. And I think, well, no, there must be something wrong. No, I won't interfere with it. And then we have this other committee, which I believe is a useless committee, is wellbeing. And we get 3 staff there. But then all of a sudden, the meeting can't go on because sadly something's happened and so forth. So the people on that committee ring me and say, Sambo, what's going on? You know, like, aren't we going to have this meeting? We haven't heard anything about it since. Probably it's a little bit about what Nathan said. When is there going to be a time, and I've heard other elected members ask the question, is there are the jobs. There's the swimming pool, as Paul said. There's these areas. What areas are just a bad asset for this council, and how many people was employed to actually run that particular asset? I think that's where I'm coming from. I mean, after all my successful businesses, you can only go by what you've done in your lifestyle. And I quite often see where I believe we've got some terrific staff that could step up and that sort of thing. But I can't say that because it's up to the CEO and the staff and that sort of thing too, to do that. But at the end of the day, all of a sudden another 3 may be employed. You know what I mean? I just wonder whether there's been, as Scotia said, and all that sort of stuff and so forth, is when it comes to the time where you look at apples for apples as regards to how things are operating, but when I see 4 staff at a meeting that I walk out of there and say, what was that meeting all about? Because nothing comes out of it to me that I can report back to anybody else. And I think all those beautiful staff there, all getting paid their, $10 an hour, and I just don't understand why. That's where I sit with this whole subject.
I think it's a really good point you raised, Brian. And Sharon's, I think, alluded to it in a couple of meetings earlier about having a look at that. And I think I shared with Councillor Koch We're going to do a series of service reviews, or service reviews across the organisation actually, starting in this coming financial year. And they're the ones which actually will drill down to all the services ultimately and go, and then, you know, there might be some difficult conversations back with council, as in the conversation's okay, but it's a difficult conversation with the community potentially to say, do you know what, we've identified that we probably want to cut back on this or cut back on that. So they're coming, okay? The way I was telling Councillor Koch about this is, for me, this first year, before we were able to do the service reviews, was about the team looking at our cost base, doing our zero-based budgeting, trying to ratchet our budgeting processes back and looking for fat in the system. And that's largely how we've delivered this little bit of a surplus ahead of the long-term financial plan. So for me, this is phase one. The next phase is, because we can't keep finding fat, hopefully we've cut most of the fat out now. The next stage has to be looking at the services themselves and is there a different way to do them? Let's look at the private sector. Have they got efficiencies that we're not aware of? Or does the council say, looking at our long-term financial sustainability, do we even do that anymore? So that's coming. That's the piece that Sharon's been talking to us about. So please rest assured, we are on the same page. I just can't do that all at once because that other piece is quite a big bit of work because we want to get it right. You don't want to rush it and bugger it up because ultimately the community are the ones that will hold us to account for that. Does that make sense? Yep.
And I'll just add to that as well. And obviously, where we've been over the last couple of years, it is really a cultural shift. And those cultural shifts it's a cultural shift at this level, but then it also has to be a cultural shift at the staff level, like the leadership level, and then the staffing level as well. Those things don't necessarily, they don't happen overnight, and you actually need to bring those people along with that journey as well, as opposed to just sort of sitting there saying, oh, okay, well, I don't think. I probably agree with you. I don't see why there's a need for 3 staff members to support a committee. And obviously we'll go back and ask those questions. But if that is I don't think that's actually endemic throughout the whole organisation. It might be just a particular circumstance for those particular committees and all that sort of stuff as well. But anyway, we'll take that on board. Yes, David.
Yeah, just while you're on staff salaries, in the budget bids, you've got like the level 6 economic development officer at 101,250. That was the rate in July 23. The rate now for July 25 is 108 to 115, and then for your AWU you've got 60,000, and I believe it's in the 70s now, so you've actually got the staff wages under what the EB says for the ASU and the AWU in the proposed bid costs.
I'll grab it from Sharon. She knows the same answer. If I can draw your attention, the economic development one's a good example. You'll notice we've got it costed at 101. That's because we've only costed for 75% of the year, indicating we'll employ from October. But then the next column over, we've indicated what the full year cost will be in future years as 135. So, I might get Sharon just to talk to us about that one.
So essentially, I'll have to just go back and check the numbers, but pretty much I would sit there and say that at level 6, that's probably around about right with all the on costs on. Off the top of my head, that sounds about right. And then probably for the depot staff, that's around about right. The 60, so around about 80 with the on costs and all that sort of stuff as well. So, but we can talk about that as we go through. So just to finish off, I just wanted to reinforce. So obviously We've got the renewal program, which basically is our renewing of our existing assets. So that's predominantly, most of that money is actually spent on our open space and buildings and our road transport. So that's our curbs, our roads, our footpaths, and anything on the street associated with that. And so this is our basic, so this is actually making sure that we're maintaining the standards, and this is where some of the renewal backlog is actually happening, where we haven't actually maintained that standard. With regard to the open space assets, this year we are actually going through doing a condition assessment and making sure that we actually are aware of all our open space assets. Open space has always been a big risk area for councils in the sense that what they actually, they tend to find a lot of assets when they actually go through this process. So I remember when at a previous council we found a whole heap of assets that weren't on our asset register. So once that data has actually been analysed, then the program will probably be more set out as to what sort of work. But the major cost in there is as per the playground strategy, is the playground renewal work. And again, with plant and equipment, so this also incorporates some computer equipment, so back-end offices. So it's not just the vehicles, the heavy vehicles and the light fleet vehicles. It does actually include computer equipment as well. With the new and upgrade, so we are proposing a lot less than what we actually had in the long-term financial plan. One of the projects that was included in the long-term financial plan was the streetscape upgrade for High Street. We're just not ready for that project at this point in time with regard to the design, so we've decided that we will actually defer that until a future year. And then also we actually also were hoping to do probably a bit more stormwater work. But again, as an organisation, we're probably not, don't necessarily have the resources to actually do that. And we have a number of the stormwater management plans and the regional plan. And that's hence the reason why we're seeking a water engineer to actually assist and so we can actually progress that work going forward. In relation to, we have done some preliminary work on what our carry forwards will be from 2024 into 25. So obviously, as a result of last week's decision regarding the Bluestone policy, we've had to defer about $1.3 million worth of work. That's 12th Street, but there's also some Bluestone curbing and work that was actually done in Porter Street. So we've obviously that will actually be deferred until that policy is adopted. Pioneer Wall, again, work's not going to commence until May. It's a big project, and so majority of that expenditure will be carried forward. Then there's some developer-dependent projects, which are essentially our traffic interventions that are required, that developers are actually required to do part of the work. So there was some in Carlton Road with the roundabout and Clark Terrace, where the developer's responsible for doing the actual road reseal. So a decision has been made to defer the streetscape upgrade to make sure that those works. And then there's some issues with regard to Tamblyn Station because of getting the design right that satisfies the Department of Transport. So the majority of the projects, and then there's a few minor ones. So one of the things that we've actually also done is cognizant of these major projects. It's not a lot of projects, so we don't necessarily feel that it's actually going to be an extra burden on our existing staff to actually finish off delivering these projects plus delivering the program that is actually proposed. And some of the projects that For example, we've talked about Anglevale, I get them confused, Anglevale Road. So what we've actually done is that we've just said it's going to be a saving this year, and we've actually reincorporated it in because there has been a bit of a change of scope in that project as well. So our program this year is actually going to be significantly smaller, where we'll probably have a program that's a bit bigger, or probably in line with the long-term financial plan, but that actually incorporates carry forward. So the other thing that actually I'll do that later. So what I'm proposing to do is, obviously we've all got the list of the projects that were presented. I think in the first instance, for the benefit of time, if we could actually just focus on the initiatives and the new projects. So from page 1 to 5 is the initiatives, and then from page onward 9 is the new capital. So I probably don't propose that we actually go through every single line. It is, I think, a question based on exception. If there's any additional information that people want to have in relation to the projects, any concerns with any of the projects, is everyone happy with that approach? Starting on page 1. We'll start on page 1. You can kick off, Paul.
I'm concerned about the first one because it's employing another staff member, and if you actually go down to bid P251006, it's actually also purchasing a new water truck, a new chipper and a new chipper truck. So you're actually doubling the workforce to do pruning, which I think is a bit... I'm an arborist and I just find that really hard to comprehend. We had an issue a couple of years ago when the staff were over-servicing, and we had a review. It took 4 years for me to get that through. We had a review, and the consultant said, you're over-pruning, because they're pruning every year. I'm concerned that we're going to go back to that same regime, because when you over-prune, you actually have negative physiological effects on trees. The trees are actually damaged, and that's what I'm concerned about. Now, one of the issues here is they're talking about the watering of the trees. I am concerned about the tree planting program, because if you go down a little bit further just 2 down, it talks about getting involved in the LiDAR data capture. And what that is actually, aerial photography to actually look at the tree cover. Now, in my opinion, I've looked at it. In my opinion, Gawler itself already has, I reckon already has 30% cover. Now, you remember that 30% cover is actually an aspirational cover by 2045. I think the problem when you look at it overall, when you add in, Cuddler, there's just paddocks, so it doesn't look good. But around Gawler itself, I reckon you're already pretty close to 30%. So I reckon it's over-servicing on 2 levels, on pruning and also on tree planting. In particular, the tree pruning is every 3rd year. So that means that in 1 year, you prune for 4 months of the year. That's over winter. You've got 8 months of the year where you're not pruning, where you can do all those other things. So I'm not sure what's happening, why we'd want 2 crews to go running around pruning, because I think that's going to affect the trees. I've worked in a number of councils where we've had I worked in a big council where we only had 1 chipper truck and 1 crew. This is a small council and you want 2. I just think that's over-servicing, and that's right for a service review now and not waiting for a year. I think that's just adding too much too quickly, because once you put it in, you can't take it out again. That's my concern.
Paul, I understand your concern, and I know you expressed it many times, but I could also have, as somebody who's worked in a council with a subject area, I could have a similar opinion about things happening in the library. I'm, in this point, going to take the recommendation of our senior staff and allow this. I think we should allow this to occur. We've already had confirmation tonight that service level reviews will come back, and we will be offered the option to say yes or no to it. But I think when we've had the review come back saying that we need to have more staff, I don't think it's only pruning. I think there's more to it than that. So I certainly acknowledge your concerns, but to me it sounds like you're on a professional level directly challenging the professionals that we employ.
No, Helen, I'm actually referencing the report that a consultant gave us, and it was the same. It's essentially, it looks like it's the same thing. It was an independent consultant. I said something, and in fact they backed it up, but it was an independent consultant that gave us that review, and basically it said that they were damaging the trees. Yeah, and you only have to read the report, and I can just see that happening again, because I'm really concerned about the health of the trees. There is a physiological damage to trees.
What I can do, Councillor Koch, is I can get Wendy just to provide us a bit more analysis on that, if that would help with the understanding. Certainly happy to do that, because I'd like to generate a level of comfort, if we can, that it's hopefully I think it's justified, but I'll get Wendy to put some more words together to perhaps hopefully give you a level of comfort.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I'd like to see the words, but anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess, so just picking up on Councillor Koch's concerns, which I think are somewhat warranted. You know, we're here as elected member just to make sure that we can contribute to the discussion. We also have that the Climate Emergency Action Plan as well, talking about our urban street tree canopy and the auditing that is being put above the line on, hey, we need to go out and do this work and see where we currently sit. Then there's also the greening our, you know, so I think in this space we've got about 60 grand sitting there, just quickly anecdotally putting this in, that hopefully, potentially, if invested right, we'll be able to either present the data that, because at the moment, and with all due respect, I'm not undermining your opinion, but while we don't have any other data, the opinion of anyone comes into play, and I think there is some appetite to invest in actually getting those data base, which, and you might even turn around and say, yeah, absolutely, but this is why I'm saying you're probably premature in pulling the trigger on the staff until you've got the other data. And, yeah.
That's why I mentioned the LiDAR analysis, is because that will tell us the percentage of tree cover, and also you have to take into account the trees that are actually established and they're going to grow, and it's 30% by 2045. So you potentially already in Gawler, if you take out Cudler, we're probably almost there, I reckon. 30% is not a lot, and now, you know, but we keep on investing and we're saying, oh, we've got to have more this, more that, more that, when we're probably already there. You know, but let's get the LiDAR. It's only 20 grand. Let's get it, and we'll see. And
we'll see where
it falls.
No, absolutely.
And that was, yes.
Oh, yeah, so sorry, I'll just pick it up on your comments. So I guess a couple of comments, and sorry, I'll just quickly touch on page 1, because I know we're there at the moment. I guess my only thing that I've got on my radar to monitor is around that blue-collar staff investment and then the white-collar staff investment, and I mean that with no disrespect, it's just the titles that are given within the industry. I see Economic Development Manager, if managed right, a very important asset to our sustainability and our moving forward. But I also acknowledge the reports and the audits that we've had done, not only in the economic space, which we acknowledge that we're undercooked in that space, but I also acknowledge a lot of the auditing and bottleneck that we have in the big arm of our business as well in relation to our blue-collar outcomes. You know, our depot outcomes, our front of house, which we are constantly talking about how we're bottlenecked. And I just see the investment in white collar over blue collar. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with it. I'm just trying to flag that if I just guess I'm asking for a little bit of comfort that there's a reason that this has been put to us, and there's a strategy here to say, hey, right now for the next 12 months, we probably only need 75,000 or whatever it sits for FTE. to get us through the next 12 months. Don't get me wrong, we're probably going to up it 12 months after, and because our audit came back and said we're about 8 short, I think.
I had a really good chat to Wendy about this one, actually, and I think I'm on the record as saying my preference is to employ more blue-collar workers than white-collar workers if we look at expanding the organisation. On the ground service, I think it's where we should invest. There's 2 roles that, in particular, Wendy, that were in this first cut, and Wendy's taken them out. And in fairness to Wendy, we had a really open conversation, and she acknowledged that she felt there was efficiencies that she felt could be achieved, and by simply putting new staff in at the moment may not help her achieve that goal. So I said, well, Wendy, I'd love you to explore that. So that was the reason why you're not seeing more blue collar. Wendy felt there was opportunity she wanted to explore before we did the recruit.
And I'm not against hiring people for the sake of hiring people, just so we can say it. If the answer here is, hey, let us get our systems in place, we acknowledge that we will need, but I think we just need to be very clear on that. In the same vein, you know, I know we're going through the process right now in draft budget. We do need to be able to say, hey, this is what we're thinking, and we're not at the point of striking the pen. But in the same vein, we've got an economic development officer that we're having good conversations in the space, but have we got the systems in place that acknowledge that 100 plus FTE is going to be return on investment as soon as they start? And those are the sorts of systems that we're working on at this point in time that might be finished come June. So I guess it's just the like for like. When we're talking about staff hiring, we acknowledge that we do need that front of house expenditure. We're saying, behind the scene, we're saying, look, we're trying to set up our systems to acknowledge we need to get it. And then the economic development space, I'm all for this right resource. If they're managed right, we've got the right systems. While we're working on them, it's the same argument. So we just need to be clear on how we manage that. If we're asking for a couple of $100,000 in extra staff, there's no answer, it's just a point.
I think the proviso there, it's not simply economic development, it's tourism as well, because we often overlook that, and yet we get lots of calls from the community to improve our tourism. The potential we have that's not being leveraged, it does sit under economic development, but I think it's always, and I think it's only mentioned in one spot, that it's the tourism as well, that we've tried many different variations over many years of economic development. I think your words are right. We have to get this to be a really top-notch value for money position, but the two combined, I think we're set up well to try and get some good stuff out of it.
I just want to add as well in relation to, I suppose, those depot staff. I just obviously as well, we're still struggling to actually get depot staff as well. You know, we had new positions in last year's budget, and some of those are still vacant because we just can't get the quality staff as well. So it does sort of sit there and see it's a bit counterintuitive to budget for more staff when we can't actually fill some of the existing positions that we've actually got now as well. And I think that that's where Wendy's thinking is that when I actually have a full complement of staff, there are probably efficiencies that I can actually having a budget to actually get another 3 staff when there's not 3 staff out there to get, it is counterintuitive in that sense as well, because obviously it is that question on if we want to have those extra staff, it is a cost to the community that essentially we may not be spending because we've still got this issue about recruiting staff, because especially at those levels, because of the tight market, that is still continuing as well. So that's another factor that comes into the thought process of why there might be less of those front end staff as opposed to what we would normally like as well.
Just a brief one, I'd say in Wendy's absence. I don't want to cast shade on strongly held views, but on canopy cover, no pun intended. I think it's fair to say what Helen said before was right, which is recommendations don't come in isolation. So just on the issue of canopy cover, I was looking at the Climate Emergency Action Plan, and it talks about doubling the canopy cover. If you go back to the issue of water trucks, which was a sort of a comment that was made in passing, I think the issue there is you've got the road services crew with a water truck, which means that the ARB team don't have a truck to go and water trees. And they're planting trees all over the place, which are hard to maintain unless you've got a water truck. And I don't want to be glib about it, but I did an analysis of the main street on canopy cover. We're at 8%. If I go to places like Oleana Waters and Aspire Estate, you'd be lucky to get 10% on a good day in some areas, and probably less in some. So I think when a recommendation comes forward, yes, I agree, as what Chris said, that Wendy will come back with further information, but we don't come up with ideas from nowhere. So I just want to say that.
Sorry. No. Thanks, Councillor Sample. I just wanted to extend a little bit to Councillor Hennessy's point specifically about the Economic Development Officer. This position has obviously been discussed for a number of years, and in the past I think there's been some concern surrounding it. But I think now it's being presented to us in a way where we need to trust the staff, and we also need to trust Chris as our CEO to go out and employ someone that's going to tick the boxes, which is, I guess the scope is broader than what has historically been discussed. So I'm getting that consensus in the room, but I do think that's very important and a really good point that Councillor Hennessy mentions. Tourism is part of that, but not only that, but us work in the economic development space at the moment means that we are going to need to have a dedicated staff member to focus on economic development. That's sort of a non-negotiable. So I'm very happy with that. I did just have a quick question just to confirm. When looking at the FTEs, if we're looking at the net cost versus the ongoing cost, is that saying we're looking at an employment for 3/4 of the year? And then, yeah, that's exactly right. Cool. Thank you.
Sharon, you mentioned about the depot not being able to get staff and things like that. Just over 12 months ago, there was a person paid a lot of money to investigate the operations of the staff, of the operation of infrastructure. And I can't recall anything that we had information and that we were told that there was anything wrong, that things were out of shape or needed this and needed that. But it was something like $250,000 we paid that person for that particular project. And I'm quite surprised to hear that they can't get staff, because the things that the day-to-day ratepayer complained to me about is that they're things that, well, if I was 20 years younger, that are so easy to do it's not funny. So I'm just wondering, are we asking for the wrong staff? That's up to that department to look at, and why we really didn't get much a report from, facilitator, or what was it, investigator of the depot? Can you recall it?
Yeah, so that was the workforce planning review, which came the recommendation that they needed additional staff. So that was where, as part of last year's budget, we actually had that start of that implementation of some of those recommendations out of that report. The issue about not being able to get staff is that, unfortunately, Brian, we're in the lowest unemployment, that we're literally in full employment at this point in time. So there's not people just sort of hanging around waiting to be employed. Realistically, for us to actually get, and the culture of the organisation is really important. And it's making sure that you're actually getting the right person as well. We can probably pull anyone off the street and say, here's a job, but they still have to have that same organisational fit to ensure that we actually can achieve what we want to actually achieve. So there's a couple of reasons. I think predominantly it is just that the fact that the labour market is very tight, and especially in that blue collar worker, because there's so much competition for resources. You know, there's so many big state government projects going on that require like civil engineers and civil people and even like arboriculture people, because they all do the landscaping associated with that as well. So, and there's the competition is just there. So it's not as though that hasn't tried. I think Wendy's probably been out a couple of times thinking that you get someone, and then all of a sudden they decide that, you know, there's a better job in the mines or somewhere else that they end up taking. So they are recruiting for purpose and for fit for purpose. It's just that the people just aren't out there at the moment.
Yeah, that might be the case, but without a doubt, the culture and those that are working here are very happy people. I've not really had anybody say, I hate working here or anything like that. That doesn't happen. And getting back to what Councillor White said, and also Councillor Hillesey, about tourism and thing, and I'm so happy to hear CEO said that we're going to look at all those departments, because, you know, we've got a magnificent building up the top of the street there and so forth. And when do we look at the point of that building, what it costs to run every day, etc., as regards to what return is coming out of there? Because as an avid tourism operator, I can tell you that people aren't happy with the opening hours of that centre. And we all know that, I mean, you know, like 4 o'clock, so, you know, Nathan's coming down the road, we'll start calling at night, hang on, the centre's... So they go on to the phone. And in all my tripping around that I do, all the visitor centre, I mean, Victor Harbour's a classic. I was down there a couple of weeks ago, and I said to the lady, they're now shoved in the whale museum down there. And I said to the lady, I said, this is like a morgue. Haven't you got some country music or something to play here? And she said to me, she said, tourism is dead down here. Everybody's putting off of their phone and electronic network. We've got to look at that here, because the tourism side of the thing is costing. We pay a lot of money.
And I think, as you know, that is one of the things in relation to looking at the services and making a decision as to whether we do continue to provide that. And all that. I'm just a bit cognizant of time. Does anyone else have anything on page 1? Yep.
So just on the Economic Development Officer, it says the position will lead the review of the Economic Development Plan, its implementation and the management of the Business Innovation Hub. So that last one, have we got any particular plans around a review of like the Business Innovation Hub? Because we sort of started it as an innovation hub with the purpose of being like, we're letting new businesses thrive, and it's sort of just become a co-working space where people have been like, I'll
just say that everything's on the table. So, you know, realistically, like we can, you know, everyone has their little area of concern. Literally everything's on the table. Obviously, there will be a prioritisation process, you know, in the sense that the focusing on the ones that we believe are going to give us biggest bang for our buck at that point in time, but everything will be on the table, because, as I said last time at our last session, that's the only way we're actually going to be able to reduce that cost structure and look for those efficiencies or find those efficiencies is by having everything on the table.
Yeah, just quickly, if I may. I think the way to look at it is, so Business Caller have identified they're good at certain things, and that's about perhaps business mentoring, support for existing business. If the council is firmly of the opinion that we need to be in the space of economic development, we need this role. To not have this role would need the council to say to me, Mr CEO, we're just going to take a step back, we're not getting involved, we're happy with what Business Caller are doing. What I'm hearing though, and out in the community and in the chamber, is that this role is something that we want, I know historically there's been some challenges about community expectation and perhaps versus delivery. I think we've got to trust the process, I guess. And as part of, if council ultimately says yes, we're going to put one in the budget, that's where, as a group, we agree what we want it to achieve, and we go to market with that, and then get the best person we can for the money. And then my job's to manage that role, to make sure it delivers, and not let it sit there and achieve nothing. But yeah, that's the context for that.
At the risk of moving us on, can we have a discussion, please, about the new engineer? Because we are looking at 3 FTEs. Traditionally, we've always said 2. I understand, and I'm not saying I'm not necessarily supportive. I just think a bit more of a discussion about what that person will be coming in to do. And there's some funding for it, and we actually didn't employ one of the blue-collar workers in that area. So can somebody have some more information on that?
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. I'll confess there's a bit of groundwork that occurred before I joined council, or Town of Gawler, so forgive me if I get some of the details wrong, but as has been noted there in the description, there's a significant strategic gap for Town of Gawler in the space of stormwater. That speaks to water security for the future, it speaks to water harvesting and reuse, and it talks also about how we manage stormwater runoff from the significant growth this council's facing. And I understand there's 2 stormwater management plans that are in development, and it's critical to complete those and get them endorsed by the Stormwater Management Authority if we are to seek state funding support for those into the future. And somebody who's been here longer throws something at me if I got this wrong. I think their finalisation has been stalled by a lack of internal resources. And look, Wendy and I have good stormwater experience as engineers, but it is also quite a specialty in its own right. So someone coming in with that specialty will certainly be able to complete those plans and then play a key role in the implementation of those plans. That's not to say that's the only piece of work they'd be working on. Day to day, we are dealing with increasing stormwater issues, where to have that resource on tap would be a great benefit. It is an area that we're often going out externally for, and I think we actually looked at reducing our consulting. We looked at reducing our consulting budget to offset some of these costs. So essentially we're saying is let's bring some of that work in-house and stop going to specialist consultants. It makes sense to go to consultants where it's something you do infrequently, but it's something that we're doing multiple times a year now.
And that's to do with our growth. I guess it's one of the non-sexy bits. I mean, and for my role, what I need to be able to explain is to a member of the community is to what will they see? What will improve for their day-to-day life? And say the growth, but the fact that you're saying it then sets us up for funding, what proportion of funding comes in from the state government to support that, please?
If you have an adopted stormwater management plan, you can apply to the Stormwater Management Authority for funding of candidate projects, typically in the order of 50-50 cost share. Now, I can't guarantee that any specific project's going to get that funding, but I can guarantee it won't get it without the SMPs. And it might be these 2 SMPs today, and there might be further SMPs in the future. I know that there's a task that I need to do tomorrow about looking at stormwater from Concordia, and that's only going to be a bigger challenge as that site develops. Both a challenge and an opportunity as more water comes into our network. So I can see this role having a very important part to play in projects around that as well.
And you've mentioned water harvesting, and I think I recall we've had some of those discussions but they haven't really progressed very far. Councillor Koshy might have more knowledge.
I think, so we did actually have a project bid in for a development of a business case to actually do that waterproofing Gawler, because we know that we've got a whole heap of issues and all that sort of stuff. And again, it's one of those things as to sit there and say we understand that we actually need to do that from that water security perspective, but without having someone that's actually got the resources and the skill set and all that sort of stuff, you can't progress it. And it's probably one of those things that you don't actually want to give out to a consultant, because you'll be paying a fortune for a consultant to do that as well. So I think that there's probably a whole heap of latent demand of, and it even goes back to sit there and say, you know, we know that there's a whole heap of stormwater work that we need to do, but we just don't have the resources to actually, or the resources, but also the skill set to actually understand that uniqueness of the stormwater. And as Ashley said, you know, we can go out to consultants and get that, but again, you're not building your in-house knowledge, and you're not building your in-house capability on something that we know is actually going to be an ongoing issue into the future as the town grows, but also as the region grows as well, because of those impacts on that growth. Because it's not just our growth; it's the growth around as well. So, yeah.
So, I'm looking at the painting of the Civic Centre facade. So the first thing I understand, so that you've got the net cost and the original bid cost, and I understand that for the staff positions where it's only 9 months. But why is the Civic Centre facade original cost 90,000 but only 50,000 in this year?
Because the original bid actually had also included the painting of the Gawler Admin Centre as well. So essentially what we've actually said is that we'll actually do focus on the Civic Centre because that has more need rather than do the Civic Centre and the Admin Centre as well. So
I'm a little stunned that it's 7 years and we're having to repaint. Is it me? My home maintenance is every 10 years, but hey.
I think the issue with that is that we actually clean it as well. So like we pressure clean it. So the quality, like the longevity of the paint, you don't steam your house, high pressure hose your outside of your, so that actually deteriorates the paint, so it doesn't last as long.
Yes, Sharon. The question on page 4 to do with traffic signal maintenance, where are the traffic lights that we own as council, number one, and why do we own them, and why does it cost $15,000 a year to maintain them if somebody clean the glass every day?
Additional question, because Helen asked that question. So they're at Bridge Street, Julian Terrace, pedestrian crossing on Murray Street, Finch Road, Koala Crossing, and Shomburg-Mulla Way. So I think that's actually just a contribution that for stuff that DIT and that don't pay for. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Samble. Yeah, unfortunately, we do need to own them because they're on council roads under the Care and Control of Council. They need to be maintained by experts. They're not something we can do in-house. So I think there'd be arrangements with DIT who have that specialty. So we have to pay an amount to them. So you do pay a premium. There's not a way of doing it cheaper, unfortunately. And that maintenance can be electrical fault, a light goes out, but also if someone does hit one of our poles, you saw one of DIT's poles get hit recently. If it's one of our poles, then that comes out of that cost as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad we don't own the ones on the bottom of Linddock Road, because it's once a fortnight now, yeah. They miss, they're gone.
The bid would be for 50,000 if that was the case.
Just touching back on the painting, I mean, I'm all for keeping your assets looking like brand new, and you know, this is one of our stable pieces. I guess just in regards to your asset management plans, you know, I think we do need to touch on, like, we would have had this developed. You would have got operations manuals from your contractor that tells you how to maintain the asset that they hand you back. If in that operations manual it tells you pressure clean the facade of your building, which I'd be surprised if it did, but if it did, then yes, it's justifiable to turn around and say, hey, you know, we delivered this in 2018. I think the was last painted, and yeah, we're due 2025, 2026 financial year, so there's a 7-year window. The novice, and I mean that with the due respect, because I'm very similar, where I would turn around and go, hey, 10 years is a bit more of a window. The punter on the street turns around and says, well, stop pressure cleaning your damn buildings because it's costing you $50,000 3 years sooner than it should. Now, that's not right. It's just we need a professional answer to that. And if we've got an operations manual that says that 3-coat system, being the external Duralux, exterior grade, blah, 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 needs to be pressure cleaned every 3 to 4 years, then by the 7th year you recommended to give it a touch-up, which should only cost you $50,000 because you're going to do 1-coat system. Should you leave it a couple of years, then you're going to be up for $120,000 because. Now, I understand you're about to tell me that the access of it and the...
Oh, no, I'm going to... sometimes it's that peer pressure from the community to sit there and say that the Premier building's looking dirty because of the fumes and all that sort of stuff as well. So, okay. You know, so it is that balancing act of sitting there saying, you know, it is the Premier building, yes. And it is, you know, it is subject to those things. So I suppose it is that, it's just that balancing act of if the community doesn't want it.
And look,
and pushing back.
Yeah, and that pushback is what we need, like, in my opinion, we need to be able to be armed to be able to push back, because this is the first time that I've heard this feedback, but I don't operate the CRMs. So, you know, I get more feedback with pressure cleaning our footpaths than I would our civic centre. So it is that balancing act. And if in the end that we're reacting at CRMs that are saying, hey, that white paint that you decided to paint our $15 million development is looking a bit grimy, we're also paying for a revamp of the, you know, the monument at the end of the street attached to Pioneer Park because no one ever pressure cleaned that. So again, there's that balancing act that if you turn around and you have an answer to the CRM that comes through and says, hey, it's looking a bit grimy, you say, yeah, I know, it's not due for a pressure clean until year blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, it'll cost us $50,000 after 7 years to repaint something, while we have sporting communities that haven't had tens of thousands of dollars spent on it in many, many years. So we just, again, managing that expectation and reacting to the CRMs, because when you get back to the OM manuals of a development to this nature, it wouldn't be recommending pressure cleaning something like this in the time that we are, that now is attracted a $50,000 expenditure 7 years after it's complete. Does that make sense? Yeah. Again, I understand why we're here, but we need to understand how we answer the question, the logical question that comes through, because we're repainting a brand new building.
Is there any other pages? Because we did.
Okay, page. Oh, I'm looking at it online. It's transport new hardscaping assets.
Can we just talk about the...
Just the new initiatives? Okay.
Is there any more initiatives before we move on? Up to page 5, yep.
I just had a couple of questions on page 2, Sharon.
Yep.
The Town Centre Structure Plan and Development Delivery Framework. So these might be to Andrew, I'm assuming. Yep. First of all, with the code amendments dot point there, is that saying within that scope that the code amendments would actually be processed through that? Like they'd actually do that? Yep, perfect. And the structure and infrastructure plan. So I'm aware of the UDF and that this is, I guess, building upon that. Does the UDF contain structure and infrastructure plans? And I guess, can you kind of, I guess, maybe just expand that a little bit more?
Yep, sure. So yes, is the answer. So if you go back to the UDF, it kind of broke down the area into 3 or 4 sub-precincts. It didn't really have a fundamental structure plan beneath it. It linked back to the development plan under the old Act, which was pretty mud-mappy. It didn't really get down to questions of use in real detail, and it didn't get down to the question ultimately of what the design heights and site coverage and landscaping and parking should generally, how it should operate. And that's the bit that's missing. So I think fundamentally the UDF had some really good ideas in it, and the vision probably still stands today. But, you know, like it talked about the entertainment precinct, but that cinema is now gone. For example, the world has changed from that period of time. And I guess what's changed as well is we didn't have any detailed work in there on traffic management. That's completely missing out of the UDF. So I just said, well, it'd be nice to get trucks out of Murray Street, but that's as far as it got to, and DIT said no, and that was the end of it. And I think when we talk about High Street being deferred, for example, it's being deferred because we need to do as part of this exercise to work out which bit's two-way, which bit's one-way. We had the trucks knocking down awnings, so that's part of it as well. So it's a broader story now, which is where the structure plan comes in. Where should trucks go? Where should they not go? How should the perimeter parking go? What should we do with our car park, for example? Should that be a future deck? All that sort of stuff, which we've sort of talked about but never got a solution on. And that's what a structure plan does. Yep.
Sharon, I just, I'm trying to put my head around this. I've read it so many times, I'm sick of reading it. 4.32 project and enhanced screening across Gawler. $40,000 for 50 trees? Come on.
That's below the line, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone.
Below the line that we're not proposing that.
I'm actually glad you raised that, Brian, because I needed council to be comfortable with this one, and I'm perhaps particularly looking at Councillor Koch as I'm saying this. I made a bit of a call that fiscal responsibility kind of outweighed our greening ambitions just to do with the additional street trees, because you need to bear in mind, and I haven't got the numbers, Ash, and I don't know if anyone has what our normal program entails. 300? Yeah, that's where my head was at. So whilst I'm saying, look, I think it's okay for council to forego this additional 50, we're still planning 300. Does that sit okay with council? I guess this is the question.
Particularly because we've done some reaching out to the community to get them to help us water them and take an interest and responsibility. I think that's been part of the missing bit, is that we've planted trees which have died, which are actually in streets that perhaps, so I'm very comfortable with it. I think it's fiscally responsible at the moment.
Sorry, just quickly, just to give a bit of positivity. I know it sounds like we're scrutinising every dollar here, which is our role, is our job. We're the ones that we have to answer to it in the end. But just in regards to, and there's probably no shock here, but where am I? So just in regards to the strategy with the sporting, so Gawler Sports and Community Recreation Facility Plan. Part 2, which hopefully you get the clarity that you're after there. But just in regards to that investment, and I've seen bigger investments in these strategies as well, so I'm happy to actually see that. This cost to me shows me that it's acknowledged that the work that's already gone on, and the $20,000 will just tie it all together, and acknowledging that some of these conversations probably happen in the working group side of things. So just in regards to, that's a realistic figure. I believe that's a realistic figure to finish off a lot of work in that space to really pinpoint that strategy that I think is long overdue. And just on the last page, just the below the line, I know we've already touched on these things, but we moved below the line, the town maintenance team. Firstly, I appreciate the honesty in around saying, hey, we can't fill the positions we currently have. Actually creating more is a bit superficial in this space. Let us get the house in order to then come back to you with what some of our strategies pull out. But what I will say is, just touching on one of the points you touched on before it there, Ashley, was just around if we can get to a point where we do see those internal resources, because we pay consultants a lot of money for design, especially, you know, around that civil engineering space. If we had our in-house one, whatever project that we'd allocate them to in the first 12 months, I think would pay dividends in what I've seen in costings prior, and then what they'd be able to establish themselves in moving forward. What I'd hate to see is we pull in these internal resources, which I've seen in the past, and no crack to people in the room at all, but I've seen it in the past where we've said that and we've brought in the internal resources, which I think is a very good investment. But then we've actually invested in the peer review and got consultants to come in anyway to either back up our internal staff member, and all of a sudden we've got an internal staff member, the professional in the space, and then we've got an external telling us the same thing, and this is a great idea because we've got our internal and external telling you it's a great thing. So just flagging that, that I really like the sentiment, and if managed right, like anything, fantastic.
Move on. It's 8:20. I think I would prefer if we move on to the new projects in the first instance, and then we'll come back to renewal projects. So the new projects start on, and this is capital, start on page 9. So this is essentially new and upgrade projects. Yep.
Yeah, with the aquatic centre, we're going to spend, what, $200,000 doing what? It's on page 10 or 14.
So essentially, the process that we'll actually go through, and we will actually have that more clarified by the time the budget comes up for adoption, is normally what happens is that at the end of the season they do an assessment on the facility. There has been a couple of each year they do that assessment. I think that there was a couple that I was speaking to David to get the answer to Helen's question that she sent through. Some of that projects as well was that there's some carryover projects that were or items that were identified from last season that they couldn't actually get done within the time frame. And then there's also obviously the condition assessment as well. So while at this point in time, because the pool's still running, we haven't bedded down the actual specific projects, but that will actually be happening over the next few weeks. Once and when the pool actually closes and we can get in there. But there is those things like so potentially any retiling or anything like that needs to be done.
The pool is 65 years old. I mean, come on. I mean, this should be at the top of the list of everything, basically.
Can I now move to the Transport New Hardscaping Assets program on page 13? I feel like I'm Councillor Samble. $5,000 for a bin?
Unfortunately, it's very expensive for a bin because when you actually also, it's not necessarily just the bin.
No, it's a pad to put it
The
on
pad
and everything
and all
else.
that sort of stuff. But yeah, they are very expensive, those
Incredible.
bins.
And I guess 4, allowance for additional customer service or customer requests, given what the Deputy Mayor just said. So yes, I can imagine people ringing in saying, I'd like a bin here and I'd like a bin there and I'd like a bin down the, so I don't have to walk too far. I guess, again, I need reassurance that we do some balancing of that, because just because somebody wants one doesn't necessarily mean budget-wise we're going to be able to afford it in this now or probably into the future.
Yeah. I think it's on page 13. It's 2.3.2. Total budget's 30,000. I think by virtue of the fact that we've only got 3,000 against that kind of allowance suggests that we're going to have to cull a lot of requests. So this, to my mind, this would be for the request that we go, do you know what? That's absolutely kind of a request that we deem necessary. There's going to have to be a whole lot of triaging. So that's a given.
Yeah, I mean, just on the bins, we've got 300 bins around town, and the cost of emptying those bins and maintaining them 7 days a week, I mean, that's just incredible.
So I'm glad you raised that, Councillor Koch. Just might be worth me sharing what I shared with you the other day. Looking at efficiency opportunities. Now, this isn't locked in, but it's a conversation I had with Wendy. So Wendy's analysing whether we need to empty the bins on the Saturday. So we do a bin empty on, well, basically all days of the week, apart from the Sunday perhaps, but we're looking at efficiency that can be gained by ensuring the bins are emptied on a Friday, having enough bins so that they can cope with the weekend's activity, and then the staff can come through on the normal Monday and empty the bins. And that would achieve significant efficiencies in terms of our weekend operations. So that is something that Wendy's working on as we speak.
I just wanted to actually go back to the Aquatic Centre for a minute. Maybe, Sharon, you can just sort of provide a bit of, I guess, high-level thinking here. So obviously, it's within the long-term financial plan. That's the whole budget. But I think Councillor Koch raises a good point in the sense that earlier we were talking about spending money on our assets when, are we doing Band-Aid fixes type things? With the pool and from your position with the long-term financial plan, what are we looking at in the next 10, 20 years? I guess we got our sights set on and what is going to be the cost each year? I guess for me, I just need to justify that obviously the pool's a cherished asset. But, if there's, what is the justification of the community for spending 200 grand on an asset that doesn't need a complete overhaul? And is that the conversation we should be having? Or how does this sit, I guess, within our overall long-term thinking of our finances?
I think the 200,000, so fundamentally, and this council is not any different to any other council, and I'm sure Chris will sit there and say that Burnside's probably exactly the same, is that fundamentally, with regard to swimming centres, my personal viewpoint is that they should actually have an asset management plan for themselves. They are a significant structure. However, I know that my previous council was just part of a building. It was a building, it was a structure. We'll just incorporate it in there and all that sort of stuff. So I think that that's fundamentally one of the issues, in the sense that these structures, yes, they're cherished, but they don't actually have that asset management plan. So they probably are one of those assets that in the past have sort of said, oh, okay, well, we don't need to spend, we won't need to spend that, we won't spend that, we won't spend that, and it gets, and they age and things break down. So, So fundamentally, I think that that's one of the things that, as an organisation, we need to do, and that will be one of the things that comes out of the condition assessment that we're actually planned to do. I think that there's always been talk about redeveloping the site. And I know that there's been part of the master plan and all that sort of stuff for Essex Park, and I know that happened beforehand. But again, and I suppose I don't necessarily see that there is an underlying strategy of what, or direction of where you want the pool to go, and the pool in the region as well. And I know it's a very contentious topic, because I spent a lot of time in my previous role actually going through this process, you know, a lot of blood, sweat and tears, and trying to work out what the best outcome is for a public swimming pool. So, and it is that question about, we're going to keep it fundamentally, you know, you're not going to close it. So again, how is our facility going to sit in with the water assets that are actually within the region? And I don't know if that level of work has actually been done to understand that, you know, now we've got, you know, you've got Trinity that's got an indoor pool, you know, so how do they relate together? So I personally believe that that's something that probably needs to happen at an organisational level, and from a community level, to understand what the requirements are. You know, fundamentally, talk about the slides and all that sort of stuff, but you know, I can just sort of sit there and say that the site probably provides some challenges for you to economically convert that site into sites from an operational perspective as well, which is also the challenge. We can do the slides, but there's a whole heap of extra supervision, extra operational costs, and is that really what the community and us as an organisation wants? So until we really understand what that redevelopment is, bringing it forward is probably, and saying that is actually the highest priority of this council, is probably doomed to fail from my perspective. Like, and I can sit there and say that I went through the consultation, and it was probably six years before we actually ended up with a strategy. So that's that. This is my personal opinion. You can take it or leave it, and all that sort of stuff. But again, it's an asset that we do need to invest, and there is some maintenance that's required. Do we need $200,000? We may not need $200,000, you know, but it is just a question of saying, okay, well, this is where we think that we need to, you know, continually to make sure that we keep the asset going, rather than having it to close it before you sit there and say, okay, well, we need to do it tomorrow.
Of course, and I guess this is the price, because this is what it costs, and we know that pools aren't cheap, for sure. And on that, yeah, I think what you're saying makes perfect sense in regards to competing priorities, you know, and that's what we've discussed and decided, and that's our roles. Certainly, we can redevelop the pool next week if we want that to be our number one priority, but we have a dozen at least major projects that I think we have been discussing that, you know, that is on us to represent the community of what comes first. So, no, I think that makes sense. I just think it's important that we're clear on where the funding goes, if that makes sense. That, like Councillor Shank said, this is our job to make sure. Yep. But of course, I think the day of saying, you know, oh, are we spending too much on maintenance and we could be redeveloping it to make it cheaper? We've lost that. Like, the pool's 65 years old. It's not where we are right now.
And I think that, you know, and again, as you know, where we're at this point in time, the council does not have the financial capacity to fund that redevelopment by itself, right? And so we will have to actually. It is in the plan. I'm not saying it's not in the plan. I'm just saying that to bring it forward, we actually really do need some external funding to actually be able to deliver and do it justice, rather than spend $10 million and people say, shit, hey, what have you done?
sorry, mate.
No, you come.
Yeah, that's great. But as Councillor White was just saying, I think one of the things that quite often I sit here and I hear you ask a question about, you know, the costs and all that sort of stuff. There hasn't been a year gone by and there's a request for a lot of money to be spent on the swimming pool. What we as elected members are asked to put our hand up and support something that your department have given us to consider. But one thing we don't get is basically over the last, say, 3 years or something to this nature, what money's been spent on the pool by everything, the point of wages, electricity, water, all of those sort of things and so forth, so that it gives a comparison as regards to the income. But if we look at all that and all of a sudden the income from the pool was not even a third of the expenses, that makes us a bit easier. It's a bit like libraries and everything. You know, we don't know what it costs to run a lot of these areas and so forth. And I don't think we get enough information to be able to freely make those decisions and put our hand up when it comes to these extra expenses. Every year there's a big expense like that.
I'll just have to say my understanding is that you get an annual season report on the swimming centre operations. So that information is provided. But I do hear what you say, and I think that that's a decision, that information is a decision that you need to make as to whether you actually want to continue to provide the pool or not. And I will sit there and say that the pool, the operations of the pool is heavily subsidised by the ratepayer.
As it is in every council.
Yep.
And there was some work done about 15 years ago that looked at it because it's actually a regional swimming pool. It's the pool that Trinity swim clubs and the Barossa swim clubs come to use for training. And I think part of it, and I have no problems with the discussion or being in the budget, but part of the problems is that we need to reposition ourselves with that business case, because maybe that would help us be in a better situation to get some of the regional funding that might be going around at some point. Because with all our growth development, with all the Roseworthy and all the rest of it, that's the use of this regional 50-metre swimming pool, which is quite unique. And I'll put it out there, I don't think our community is going to for one moment allow us not to have a swimming pool like that.
I agree with you. I agree with you, and I think that that's my point in the sense of what's our strategy with regard to that, so we are in a position, like I get that we've got a master plan, but I think we need more of that business case and that strategy development to actually be able to do in that position, to actually get some funding if when the funding's around.
Yeah, look, I know we're sort of on the swimming pool at the moment, but I think some of the comfort or information might be able to be curved in the next version of this. The $200,000 just gets simply broken down. Like, you know, we've got a capital works engineering design program, and we've got $25,000. We've got $25,000. We've got another 10. We've got. So just, I guess that breakdown might be able to inform elected members just to turn around and say, yeah, we're actually upgrading a heat pump that costs us $60,000 next year, and then we've actually got a repaint program worth 15. You know, it is just those 1%ers that might be able to provide that comfort that actually leans back into Councillor Koch's original question, saying $200,000 for what? Because, you know, where you got, which this might be a decimal point miss, but it said original budget. But yeah, okay, good, because it started at 20,000. If you look at the spreadsheet, you're going, hey, you've just gone up 200K. Hence probably some of the questions here. And again, noting this is a draft, but absolutely getting around the business case for the swimming pool. I think that's been a sentiment this chamber and past chambers have actually talked about, because it's absolutely a community asset. If you look at it through a business lens only, it's losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. However, we're not in the business of saying, hey, we need to be profitable. So you need to actually implement the customer satisfaction as a value as well. So we can't just look at it as it's a business losing nearly $500,000. You need to look at the usage, which is in the thousands. And I think we've talked about it before. I think I'm on record saying, hey, if we're worried about, absolutely, and if we're worried about external ratepayers that actually don't pay rates here, I've actually said, ask for their licence and charge them double. Like, yeah, that might cause a little bit of a stir, but it is what it is. Because we do have other options here in Gawler. Trinity absolutely use Town of Gawler facilities, no questions about it. They also have a really good state-of-the-art facility themselves that offer swimming school, etc. And you know, as parents, we pay a premium for that, and we get to use it all year round for that premium. But there is a market, and as we grow, there is a business opportunity there. But there's a big investment to be made. So yeah, where we sit, I think does come down to the strategy, business plan, etc.
I think, yeah, I think the way you do it is you have an amount and give a rebate to Gawler people. That's the way you do it.
I'm just conscious we've already lost one person, so are we nearly to a point of winding up?
I've got a big one in the other line.
I just wanted to quickly just make a comment too, because I know we're scrutinising negative. I know Councillor Shanks mentioned something earlier, but there is some really good stuff in here too. So just want to commend staff on that. And the other part is, you know, it's so funny, isn't it? We talked for 20 minutes about the 200 grand. We gloss over the 600,000 when we talk about curbing. There's $3 million worth of road reseals. But I guess what the point of that is, you know, we're a council. We need to spend our money on something. Yeah, you know, we've got to. And as to steal Wendy's quote about her department having the biggest budget, and also Sharon saying that a council's core business really is asset management. That's who we are, and a big part of that is our infrastructure. So when we gloss over it, I guess we need to just acknowledge that we're not glossing over it. We're acknowledging this is core business and we need to continue doing this. We're scrutinising the smaller stuff that maybe isn't as justifiable to the community, or we just need a little bit more information on that. So yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, big thank you, and yeah, we need to spend our money on something. So this is important.
I've got one. It's the other one above. It's on page 7, and this goes right back to my opening gambit. I mean, it took 4.2.1, it's page 7. It says backlog. Renew irrigation system at Hemmerford Grove, $150,000. What is the operational savings from doing that? Because it doesn't actually, and then again, it doesn't talk about maintenance or recurrent. Because what is the operational? We don't water it. So what's the operational?
Page 7.
Yeah, page 7. What's the operational savings? Because this, I could quote this, but I won't.
Yeah, so I think some of this is about, this could actually be increasing our current level of service to meet the demands that the community are asking for. And if council says to us, do you know what? No, we're going to hold the line and we're not going to irrigate anything that's not being irrigated, that's okay, but I guess we've tried to listen to the community as well in some of these bids, and that was something that kept coming through loud and clear. But I'm happy to take feedback on that.
Yeah, I think you're listening to a proportion of the community about Hemmerford, and so maybe the point should be is that we need some more justification around that, because my understanding, like Councillor Kosh, is that we had stopped watering that area. If we're going to increase the service level, like, it needs to be done a little bit more with due diligence.
I'm certainly happy to provide some information around that.
Yeah.
That's okay.
But the other thing to remember, I've said it a number of times, people need to read the Jerry Charlton report. We talked about water and how to design open spaces. It doesn't talk about green everywhere, it talks about consolidating what you've got, putting in native plants and windbreaks and all that sort of really great stuff. You know, and having small irrigated areas, which is what you've got at Hemmerford Grove. You've got a playground, a little kick-around area. Yep. That is probably what, if you're really serious about climate change and financial sustainability and environmental sustainability, I don't know why that's in there, and that's all I'm going to say.
No, good question. And trust me, I'm more than willing not to spend it if we don't need to. So thank you for the question, and we'll follow that up.
Sorry, Chris, just a question on following on from that. So for me, it's really great. Look, I think when I first got on council, it was always that why are we putting all this money into plans when they're just plans. Now I'm seeing the action from the plans and it makes sense. Long-term financial plan being the big one, but for example, the play space is one, and seeing the 400K in there, but knowing that that's aligned with our play space strategy, that's fantastic. I guess we have, there's been discussion about the community land spaces policy or plan. Sorry, that might not be the correct wording, but it came up when we were looking at the Hemmerford Grove
community land. Yep.
Community, yes. So, so for example, looking at renewing irrigation system at Hemmerford Grove, correct me if I'm wrong, but shouldn't that be coming from that policy or plan about community land that is still in development or hasn't been development yet, or what exactly? I know you're going to provide some more information, but I guess. That's probably, I can understand maybe some of the concerns that Councillor Koch is saying. Yeah. What exactly, yes, I understand that's coming from community, but strategically, why is that in there, I guess, and what is it actually involving? I know you'll give us some more information. That can be a question on notice.
I'll take it on notice, because obviously Wendy's the font of knowledge on this one, hopefully. So no, I'll do some more homework and we'll come back with more information.
So, sorry not to throw a cat amongst the pigeons, but it is sort of my thing. I guess just around some of our open space, some of the consistent feedback we've received is just around some of our open space actually coming to a point of not usable for the locals that the open space is there for. The Hemmerford Grove feedback, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even the telephone pole was pointing on saying it's actually not being used as much, and therefore we can, because although we've invested a bit of money in a playground there, the open space next to it was deemed more or less unusable. Yeah, I agree. I understand your point, Councillor Koch. I also have 2 young kids that we can't go around and run around on that space in comparison to some other open space. So our play space strategy, our open space strategy, the plans to make a plan, as you pointed out, rightfully so, Councillor White, is just about understanding our service level of what we're going to bring our open space up to. Now, whether or not the irrigation brings us to a level C or a level B, but not bringing it to an Apex Park level being a level A, am I right in saying that this investment is about aligning with those sorts of strategies and saying our open spaces need to either be at a service level, etc., which this is what that is aligning with. However, then putting aside our differing opinion on what's usable space, being the natural grasses and the like, which I don't disagree with, because they do have a good place. But if you actually go down, in the same line item, it actually talks about the Redbanks Road. The Redbanks Road playground of $70,000 for the irrigation. Yeah, that's right. The Allingdwye Limekiln Park. Can you just, all right? So the $70,000 there aligns with that new playground upgrade, and also, the use for kids' parties and the like being an irrigated space. So the question there, you'd turn around and go, you're spending $150,000 on a bigger parcel of land, but $70,000 on a smaller, get that down to a square metre rate, So again, these are all great talking points, but just so we're clear, if we're putting positions forward, I'm not interested in you deleting that right now. We do actually want to understand the mentality, but I do see it linking to our open space, getting it to a level that we have been told time and time and time again that our community wants it at. This isn't just a pocket. I don't believe it's a pocket necessarily that open their front door and want to see green, is what I'm saying, because I give the same feedback.
we're having parts of the community lobby that become our new sporting ground, Nathan. So there's lots of discussion. And I agree with you. We're not saying don't do it, but just tease out from Wendy a little bit more so we have comfort with what we're trying to do.
Doesn't tell us the recurrent and cost or the maintenance. So that's going to go through the roof.
I think, for Chris to provide that comment is really important. And look, I've been on council long enough to know that $150,000 is not giving us a beautiful green thing and sprinklers. Or if that is, that's an incredible deal.
It's everything under the ground anyway, so you're not going to see anything.
But no, I guess my whole point is the community were here this time last week and they, on a separate issue, but has said, we'd be really looking at discussing this space. I know that we've got this discussion going in progress, not just for Hemford Grove, but across the town. I guess what I'm looking at is when we're putting this in, the justification of, what exactly we're looking at and the justification behind it, because Paul, I agree with you. I want to look at all the options. I want to look at what would it look like completely turfed? What would it look like as a sporting precinct? What would it look like as a fantastic native botanic garden? Because there's options for all of those things, but that's where I think I see this community engagement that's ongoing work, which may not be a priority one at the moment, which is okay because of our current state of play. But I guess when you see things like this slip in, I agree, I don't want it to just be a line and I'm not sure what it is, but I also don't want it to be deleted because I don't know what it is. So we're in the early draft stages and I guess the whole point of tonight is to go through and say, what do we need more information on? And that certainly is something I'm interested in.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about that because I've got plenty to debate, but, take it to a motion if you want to get rid of it and we'll have a discussion. But the community scorecard is the one I wanted to touch on. Do we have any data that this is in use or is, because we're talking about the assistance of 30 staff operating this, is this something that is getting traffic to the website or that staff are using to cross-reference, or is this just I don't know, because I've looked at it and it's, I don't know, there's a lot there. It's sort of like looking at a pilot's dashboard or something, and even as someone who, reads budget reports and things, and I just wonder, is it currently, before we spend money on, I guess, making it easier to update, have we sort of looked into, is it worth keeping?
My personal opinion, in the current form, I believe it's probably served its purpose in its current form. I think it's an important vehicle that we could better utilise, and that's basically part of the review. So fundamentally, it's a very labour-intensive process to actually update at this point in time. So it is a complete revamp. We're actually also going through a process concurrently at the same time, actually better linking it back to our community plan, because that's, while I wasn't here when it was developed, my understanding is it's a tool that we use to communicate to the community how we are actually progressing on that more operational level and project type level on delivering on our aspirational strategies and objectives that are actually set out in the community plan. So I think, personally, I think it's a good tool. We have had some very positive feedback from it from other councils who have seen it. It's just that the fact that it's in its current form, it's served its purpose, and we actually need to pretty much strip it back. There is too much information on there. I think it was what do we collect and what piece of information do we collect, and let's just start putting that out there to the community. So I think that if we can actually streamline the back end of it and then push out the front end of what are the key metrics that is important to the community, and the community needs to actually understand that we are actually delivering on our community plan.
Thank you for that, because this is one of the first things when I It's too dense. It's information rich, but we just splattered everything on there. And when I do informal surveys of what people use on our council website, I haven't found anybody, not one person, because they click on it, they don't understand what it is. It's too hard to read, too hard to understand. So there's been lots of, within the chamber and within staff, oh yeah, it's a good tool, but you're absolutely right. It's not being used properly. So the fact that it comes with a review of how we display the measures gives me great comfort.
Yeah. It's not going to be just automate the back end. Yeah. It is a complete review of making sure, and realistically, as a scorecard, we're not scoring anything, to be honest. And I think that's one fundamentally thing as well, is that we should be using. It is probably it's a tool that we should be using internally to communicate how we are actually improving, and how we're actually doing better year on year, which I don't think that's actually that purpose is being served by it at the moment. So it's not just the automation, but it will save a lot of staff a lot of time every quarter. Just ask Erin and that probably have the easiest part of it to actually update from that perspective. So as well, so there will be some efficiency, like I suppose some time giving back to a lot of staff, if we can actually just automate that. But fundamentally, before we do that, we actually will be, which we're currently doing now.
Sharon, item on page 7, P251016. I heard Councillor White mention about it too, and certainly Councillor Koch is well up with the fact of the new irrigation system they put on Hemmerford Grove. It was one of the best systems that they've set up there. With anybody that knows anything about it, go for a drive up and have a look. And what really blew me away, a beautiful row of jacaranda trees was planted on the street, right in the, and this irrigation system was in the middle of it. And Ray Cochelle, who you heard the other night, lives directly opposite. But those trees weren't set up with a dripper system. When do we get an opportunity to ask, and I mean, it says here $150,000 to renew the water system? Well, it worked perfectly until the tap was turned off. So I don't understand if it worked well before the tap turned off. I mean, I wouldn't mind going down and turning it on, because it's one of the best. Would you agree, Councillor Koch, that the water system, the power, it's like 6-inch pipes? If you had that in your garden, you'd blow the crows off the back of the fence. When do we get a chance to ask that department as to what reason will it need $150,000 to re-water that? Only other quick question. Is Gawler in any way in line to be connected with the recycled water from Bolivar? It was talked about many years ago.
Yeah, I've been asking the question quite often since I've been here. At this point in time, it appears not. I think we'll keep prosecuting the case, because it will give us a much more affordable source of water if we can achieve that. There could be opportunities in the future, depending on how SA Water decide to deal with the expansion in the north, whether all the sewer goes back to Bolivar, or whether they look at an uncentralised treatment system out this way. Then we should be able to tap into the water stream much more readily. So we'll keep looking at that one. I agree, that's a good idea. Just broadly, with the renewal of Hemmerford Grove, millennial drought was 2009, 10. So essentially we've had an irrigation system that hadn't been turned on for 14 odd years. So anything that hasn't been turned on for 14 years tends to seize up. So in essence, that's what we're dealing with, a system that just hasn't been operational. The specifics of what's broken or crumbling or corroded, I can't give you right now. But that's essentially what's happened, to my knowledge, is we just haven't used it for that long that it does need full replacement.
They fitted it beautifully when they fitted it. It was all brass fitting.
Yeah, okay. I'm happy to get the data and the detail. I'll follow it up so we can give you a bit more comfort on what's going on.
We can get down to Turn North if you like.
That's one way to find out.
Yeah, sorry, I'm taking us back to page 1. It's not my fault. I'm going to blame Councillor Lorna on this because he did ring me and ask me to ask on a specific item, and I sort of forgot until now. So I'm just going to paraphrase. I hope I do him justice. So the Climate Emergency Action Plan implementation, there's $20,000 on that. I guess the clarification that Councillor Lorna was seeking is just around the actions that come out of that strategy, and I did tell him that I was on that working group, so, you know, but he was talking about the $20,000 and the return on investment because he also pointed out, and rightfully so, as we did touch on, as I'm sure some of my colleagues will attest to, in that group, we talked about actions that needed to be justifiable to people that necessarily don't follow or believe whatever it is that we have in our community. However, what's really good about a lot of our actions was about, it doesn't even matter where you sit on the climate change point, it's about the investment in the infrastructure that actually sees a good return. What his question, and we all know Councillor Lorna's passion and experience in solar initiatives and green power, so putting that aside for a second, his question is around the $20,000 and just if he can have a little bit of clarity on if this is those sorts of actions where we can start picking up some efficiencies and we do see some return on investments, or are these the sorts of actions that sound great and more of a feel-good, but are we in a position in our budget, sadly, are we in a position in our budget where we can invest in these feel-good sentiment actions that absolutely need to be done, but because we're 0.01% of the, you know, in that space, acknowledging that we understand the KPI around it, blah, 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 but the question is around that $20,000 expenditure and the return on investment. So he's just trying to understand that. So when he talks to his ratepayers, or we talk to ours, what the answer is there, because, yeah, the feel-good stuff, and again, I mean that with the utmost respect, obviously, but the feel-good stuff, do we have the money to invest in it this year, or is there another project that shows tangible return on investment, question mark?
That's a fair question. And if I look at the justification at the minute, we've got 10,000 for canopy mapping, and the other 10 is for essentially skills and development. So that's saying we're not going to see anything tangible. So yeah, we need to question whether that's worthwhile expenditure in the current climate.
And I think that there's an opportunity probably because I think there's an update on the Climate Emergency Action Plan next week. So I suppose that's probably an opportunity as well to seek some further clarification as well at next week's workshop information session. Is there any other items that anyone wants any further clarification on? Just before we finish up, I just thought in relation to the participatory budgeting, so we had the drop-in session a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or earlier this month. And we also had an online survey as well so those people that could actually couldn't come along, that they had an opportunity to actually provide feedback. So we did put a few suggestions as types of projects that were actually up there that people could rank and vote on. And then there's also the opportunity for people to make suggestions. Unfortunately, the people that were making suggestions were were beyond the $20,000 budget limit. And probably some of the ideas were probably outside the scope of council as well. So based on so based on the information that we've actually got back, so these are the projects that we were proposing to put out there for the community vote to develop further into that participatory budget project. So there was a lot of, like, obviously with the drop-in session, that there was probably a bit of a lend towards the public art and the heritage and all that sort of stuff. But there was also a lend to, I think, those biodiversity projects and those small diverse. So that's the bird nests and the bee hotels and all that as well. Street libraries, and then obviously some of the run-of-the-mill stuff that everyone wants is, you know, some outdoor shelters and some drink fountains and park benches. So from, I think it's from next week, we will go out to vote and get the community to vote on their preferred project, and then we'll incorporate that into the budget as well as that for that $40,000 participatory budget allocation as well.
Without fear or favour, I just make the comment that two of those top priorities, street libraries and public art, were already being undertaken by sections of the community as community projects. And I just wonder what type of response we'll get back when council's offering to move into a space that is actually seen as a community-driven project. We'll just wait and see, I suppose, with that, see what happens with that.
Yep. So that's all I have. I won't go through that. That's just basically information that will be available to you. So yeah, so the 10th of, probably the 12th, because the 11th, because the 10th is a public holiday. We'll commence the voting, and then we actually have the special council meeting. If the chamber feels comfortable that they've got enough information to actually come back and endorse the budget, because the timetable had whether we actually needed another information briefing session. If you don't feel that you need another information briefing session, we will work towards that. We'll have that as a special council meeting, and then to endorse to actually go to the risk and audit and risk meeting as well for their feedback. Silence is acceptance, great. And then so at this point in time, we're still on track to have the annual business plan and budget endorsed for community consultation or in community engagement at the April council meeting. All good? So thank you for coming along, and we'll see you in next week.